IVM.
How should we think about the relationship between governments and businesses? Is lobbying a bad thing? Can the private sector engage with governments in a way that doesn't involve corruption, cronyism, and more? Rahul Sharma joins us today to talk about the evolution of corporate-government relations in India. Welcome to the Pragati Podcast, a weekly talk show on public policy, economics, and international relations. I'm your host, Pavan Srinath. Our guest this week is Rahul Sharma, who is a managing director at APCO Worldwide, heading their India office. Rahul has been the editor of Hindustan Times in India and Khalij Times in the United Arab Emirates, and has headed various public affairs teams for the last decade at various places. Rahul was a founding member and past president of the Public Affairs Forum of India, an association dedicated to raising and maintaining ethical practice in public affairs. Most recently, Rahul was the Deputy Secretary of FICCI, the Federation of Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. On this episode, Rahul joins us to talk about the evolving relationship between governments, corporations, industry bodies, and more. This episode was recorded in Delhi in December at Pindrop Media. We'll be back with Rahul Sharma after this short break.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another awesome week on IVM Podcast. If you aren't following us on social media, please make sure you do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. On Instagram, we've been doing an interesting thing recently. What we're trying to do is whenever a listener is listening, they take a screenshot of what they're listening to, they make a comment, and they tag us on it. And we're reposting that on all of our stories. So, if you want to get on our feed, then please do tag us. And otherwise, if you want to see what other people are listening, then go and check out the Instagram account and you can take a look at that. On Cyrus Says, Cyrus is joined by Revati Roy. She takes Cyrus through her entrepreneurial journey and her fondness for cars and driving. On Pulyabazi, the host discussed how the US reached the position of a world leader and what are the odds of China replicating that feat. Speaking of Pulyabazi, they were also featured in the Scroll magazine article talking about how English-speaking urbanites are interested in listening to content in Hindi languages. Check out the article on our Instagram highlights section. On IVM Likes, comedian Supriya Joshi joins the IVM gang to talk about pop culture they consume in non-English languages. Last week, we launched a brand new Hindi podcast called Cinemaya. It's hosted by Swati Bakshi and our first guest is Nandita Das. She discusses her journey as a woman filmmaker in a male-dominated industry. And with that, let's continue on with your show.
Hi, Rahul. It's an absolute pleasure to host you on the Pragati Podcast. Welcome.
Thank you.
I've got the opportunity to catch you here in Delhi, and I really want to understand how to think about corporate government relations in India and how that is evolving and changing and how you've seen this evolve and change over the last 10 years. I want to start by asking the question, what is lobbying and why is it a dirty word in India?
So I really don't know why it's a dirty word. Lobbying essentially has been around for forever. We as individuals, as children, we lobby with our parents, we lobby with our teachers.
GI Joe kharid lo.
Yeah, lobbying essentially is trying to sell to somebody or trying to convince somebody of the need for something that you are interested in. It is personal. In terms of business, it is something that impacts business. So lobbying has got a dirty word largely, I think, for two reasons. One is in the good old days of the license Raj, the relationship between the industry and the government was very different than what it is now. What it meant then was a lot of middlemen, a lot of people who would be the bridge between the industry, and most companies actually employed certain people whose job was just to make sure that the people in the government were happy. And when I say that, I mean taking care of needs and requirements of people in a manner which was not usually conducive or in the right way of working. But I think that has changed. That has changed dramatically. And the change started somewhere in the 90s. Once the economy started opening up, it became easier to set up businesses. People didn't need to go around looking for those licenses. They did not need to convince a particular individual or a particular entity. So it became easy. When it gets easy to do business, obviously a lot of things that require to be when it is not, get out of the way.
Right.
So we reached a point where we eventually sort of saw a change in the kind of things that needed to be done. to convince the government of your point of view. But let's look at lobbying. Lobbying actually goes back, even from an industry point of view, in India, many, many decades. If I'm not mistaken, we can look at something like the Dandi March was an effort by the industry who convinced Mahatma Gandhi to go out for the walk and actually, make changes in the law, right? So
Mahatma Gandhi was a lobbyist. Oh my God.
that's one way of looking at him, among other things. He wore many hats, but then, he was very close to the industry, and he was, in fact, one of the persons who was responsible in the formation of FICCI, the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, and he actually addressed the annual general meeting of FICCI back in around 90 years ago.
Wow.
So the reality is that lobbying has been there forever. It got a bad name for various reasons, but a lot of those reasons are now out of the way. Increasingly, what has happened is that the relationship and the exchange between industry and government has been formalized to a large extent, especially in the last 7-8 years, where you are in a situation that requires industry to actually go and connect with the government to convince the government of what it requires, right? Obviously, the government is interested in a couple of things when it comes to policy making. One, any new policy that comes into play should have an impact on the largest number of people, a positive impact. And secondly, it should not impact the government's bottom line. So that's critical. Right?
And that bottom line could be revenue.
It's mostly revenue.
Mostly revenue.
Mostly revenue. Because when people go and ask for certain changes in law or in policy which impacts business, it's largely on the taxation side and it's opening various other fields and the government says, okay, fine, I'm happy to do it. Then just show me how it's not going to impact me badly. If it impacts me positively, if it raises my revenue, I'm happy to make the change. And as long as it is not directed at only one entity or just a handful of entities, but a larger play. Right? So government is not unhappy about that.
I find that fascinating because, to go far away from Delhi to our little town, Bangalore, excise department, which is one of the most conservative departments which care so much about that bottom line. The Karnataka excise department saw wisdom in saying, hey, there are these things called brew pubs. They can brew their own beer in a smaller batch. We don't just need beer being bottled from one large distributor. And so we'll create a new license. We will tax it. We will make new money. And today, Karnataka, if they are lucky, will get 20,000 crores this year in the state budget. And that's one of the highest in the country, if not the highest. Exactly what you're saying, right? So it's their bottom line is met. People are happier because there are more options. There are new restaurants, new places to go for entertainment and for a good drink. And people are better off.
Yeah, so I think people have started understanding within the government and outside the government that there's always a way to find that agreement, that little patch where the interests can converge. And once interests converge, then life is easier for everybody, right? Then there's nobody questioning.
Right.
Okay. It's only when one side is seen to be sort of egging out of its way to make it easy for the other side that people start asking questions, right? But if everything is fine and out in the clear, transparent, there is no reason for anybody to raise a question mark on that. So increasingly what is happening is, so say for example today, the government actually seeks information and point of view from industry bodies, from individual sectors, sectoral bodies. And everybody then goes and shares that. And, it's all done very transparently, right? And that change, I think, should help in ensuring that lobbying is not seen as a dirty word. So, and also the other thing that's happened is because of the nature of the job that has changed, it has now become more engagement, which is backed by research, which is backed by knowledge, which is backed by understanding of global best practices, what's happening around the world in a certain area and how it's going to benefit us if we go around that. I think the nature of the people and the kind of people who are getting into this profession of public affairs has also changed. You have, and when we decided to set up Public Affairs Forum of India and make it into a platform for.
When was this first?
Well,
ideated?
PAFI actually started off more of a kind of an informal bunch of people getting together and inviting senior government officials to come and have a chat to understand them and for them to understand what the government point of view was about 10 years ago, right? But then about 5 years ago, we decided to turn it into a formal body and, start sort of provide a platform to the professionals to come together for exchange of ideas, exchange of experiences, exchange of knowledge. And that's a process that's starting to take place now.
Was it also a little about setting some standards and norms in place as well?
That is one of the things that we would want to look at. But, what we are clear about is that public affairs today, quote unquote, lobbying, has to be ethical, has to be knowledge-based, has to be research-backed, and has to be transparent. It's not something that you go into a corner, huddle under a bridge and do a deal and, exchange brown packets. Those days are gone.
No, and even when that happens, 2 years later, there's some RTI, there's some investigation, something.
So, yeah.
So the company doesn't benefit, huge reputation loss.
Yeah.
So companies in India are seeing that in even their medium-term interest or long-term interest, they should invest in this.
Yeah, invest in this. And increasingly you see companies sort of slotting for these kind of jobs where people are, brought in just for the purpose of putting together the whole policy framework and helping them, senior people in the companies, to understand the lay of the land from a policy point of view. Essentially, my personal opinion is I think that the biggest and the most important ambassador in terms of engagement with the government at any level, especially at the higher levels, is the head of the company. He or she should be then helped by a team which looks at policy from a strategic point of view, from an investment point of view, from a long-term revenue generation point of view. That if we go in that direction, does it help? If it doesn't help, if it helps, then how does it help? And actually provide the background and the back end understanding of the subject matter. And then it becomes easier. Because what's happening is that over the last few years, the way the economy is evolving, right, it's going into a very different direction than what it has been following in the past. So from manufacturing to service to gig economy, now we are heavy into e-commerce, digital economy. A lot of it is not really understood by people. People are still battling to figure out what it means, where it's going. Even large global companies in this side of business are still sort of grappling with how do you evolve and where do you go and what are the kind of problems you can face. So you have a situation where there's a whole lot of learning that is required. The government needs to put out new policies. Wonderful. But the government may not have the right knowledge and the right background, right understanding. Timing is crucial because these businesses are growing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, look at e-commerce, for example. Digitalization, data localization are areas where there's a huge debate going on. And these are debates which can impact the sovereign, right? It's not something which is going to impact just a few companies, handful of companies. It is about the national interest too. So how does it all pan out?
Right.
What is required? That kind of understanding.
And where we see more innovation, then we'll need more understanding
Absolutely.
of this, right? I mean, genuinely being able to govern, say, cab aggregators in a way that you maximize for all interests is not a challenge that anybody has really solved yet, right? How do you genuinely manage the labor concerns, the industry concerns, the consumer welfare concerns, and actual connectivity and safety? Nobody in the world has really solved this yet.
So how do you deal with a hotel company that doesn't own hotels?
Absolutely.
How do you deal with a cab company that doesn't own cabs? How do you deal with a warehouse that deals with in so many goods? It was fine to have a warehouse for chemicals or warehouse for plastic goods or warehouse for this ABCD.
But now the warehouse has food, it has consumables,
it has electronics, white goods, it has just about everything. So how do you deal with it? What is it that you need to do to ensure that if as a government I want to get something out of it, my bit of the cake, how do I get it? Right? So all this requires a lot of knowledge and understanding. And it needs to come in fast because lawmaking process is not, it takes time, right? But we are all battling this time because the economy is evolving at a pace and changing at a pace which we ourselves don't understand.
Yeah, the technology and the companies will not wait for the law.
No,
right?
they're not waiting for the law, right? They're out there doing their business, right? You look at OYO, for example. OYO aims to become the world's largest hotel company. Does it own a single property? It does not, right? Look at Uber, look at Ola. Look at all these food delivery companies. You look at Swiggy, you look at Zomato, you look at what is their business model, right? To understand that business model and to then bring laws around it is difficult. I mean, we are in a country where direct selling has been in place for more than 20 years, almost 20 years now. We still don't have a law to regulate the direct selling industry. And this is an industry that is asking for a law to regulate it. It goes to the government and says, I want regulation. I want to be regulated. And the government says, chit fund, Ponzi scheme. We don't know who you are, right? And here's an industry that's grown, employs X number of people, claims to employ, actually has manufacturing centers in the country, right? But, people who sell those products are routinely caught by the police and under chit fund or the Ponzi scheme, that kind of stuff happens. And then it becomes a police case. And once it becomes a police case, then these companies are running around and saying, hello, what do I do? Why have you put my CEO behind bars? What has he done? Oh, there's a complaint against you guys.
This is amazing because you don't often hear that, companies or industry associations coming and saying, please come and regulate me.
Yeah.
Because everyone wants to know the rules of the game, right? Yeah. So that you can play the game fairly in a way that you don't...
And, when people want to play the game fairly, they should be allowed to.
And they can't if they don't know what the rules are.
They don't know what the rules are. But for them to play fair, the rules have to be in place. Now, who's going to set those rules? The government is going to set those rules. But the government itself is kind of doing a little ping pong game on whether they should or they shouldn't, or he should do it or she should do it, and maybe that is the better person to do it. That's a good department.
The competent authority shall do it.
The competent authority can do a lot of things, provided you understand who the competent authority is, or you identify that competent authority. Without that, how is it going to happen? So these are the kind of issues you face. But I think as a profession, public affairs is still very nascent in this country. There are agencies that provide public affairs support to client companies. Companies themselves have staff that engages with the government across levels, state, center. And we also need to understand something very interesting that's happening is that example you gave about, pubs in Bangalore. You see, action is moving into states, right?
You just look at the state list of subjects.
Yeah.
They are what determine most things in our life and most things that most businesses care about. So you can come to the center and get whatever XYZ clearances you want, or look at sort of influencing policy, which is a big ticket policy. But your actual operational issues are in state. So that's where the action is. That's where increasingly companies have to now engage with the government. Not that they've not been engaging, but I think the formal kind of an engagement, ethical, formal, structured engagement, a lot of that is beginning to happen in states now. And in fact, PAFI is very keen to sort of extend its reach into the states and set up, local offices and get members there. So that I'm based in Bangalore.
Yeah.
The more public affairs people who are there in Bangalore, the happier I would be.
The happier you would be, So that's how it is. But it's all time consuming. It takes time. It's not something that can happen very clearly, very quickly. So, but we are working on that.
We'll be back with Rahul after this short break.
India's a massive subcontinent, home to truly stunning diversity. Behind the veils of smoke that obscure our thriving cities, our history is still alive, glimmering like sequins, waiting to be discovered. And if you, like me, are straining to hear the echoes of our past, this podcast is for you. I'm Anirudh Kanisetti, a history and geopolitics researcher, and I host Echoes of India, a history podcast about India by Indians and for Indians. In Echoes, we journey through the complex histories of South Asia and what they can teach us about our globalized world. Tune in every Wednesday on ivmpodcast.com or your favorite podcast app.
Welcome back. So could you tell me a little bit about the industry side, body side of things? So one is, PAFI is a group of professionals who are engaged in this space. But to me, FICCI has been a voice for all of Indian industry, right? And that's a massive challenge. I mean, where do you begin and end with Indian industry? So how do you see industry bodies working and how do you see them evolving?
I think industry body themselves are in yet another evolutionary phase. Because, like I said, as the nature of the economy changes, the nature of the industry bodies also change, because the kind of membership it starts getting is different from the membership they had, right? So FICCI and other industry body would earlier have membership from traditional sectors like manufacturing. You have cement and you have mining and you have aviation and you have all those things, right? But now you are going into a different direction. So the e-commerce companies will come into play. Digital platforms, whatever that there is, providing all kind of services, they come into play. Big data companies, right? What do you do with a Facebook that's a member, right? What do you do with an Amazon that's a member? Their needs are very different from the needs of the traditional sectors, right? So there's a lot of learning that needs to be done by the industry associations too. Earlier, industry associations, industry bodies were kind of a link between the government and the industry. Okay.
Oh, so as one industry, if you try and do something with the government directly, there can be challenges and problems. So an industry body is a more legitimate representative of your company's interests. Right? All right.
Because you as an individual can go in. Again, like the point I made earlier, the government is always open to listening to something that's going to impact a much larger section of people than one entity. So you want to do that, right? So that therefore industry associations, industry bodies were, kind of a great tool to go approach. The government would go to an industry body and say, okay, so what are the kind of suggestions that you may have for the upcoming budget? So industry body would put all the budget proposals together from various members and sectors and committees and give one big fat book to the government. Somebody will sit through it, understand it in the finance ministry and put it out. Some of it will be taken, some of it will not be taken. Depends. But one of the other things used to be for industry bodies to have offices overseas so they could attract investment into India. So they were the one-stop shop for people who wanted to invest and then come through that. But I think a lot of that has changed because there is a lot more interaction directly between the industry and the government. Right? Which means industry bodies are in a place now where they need to really think, what is it that they need? What is it that they have to do? What is their utility? Right? So I think there's a need to make a shift towards intellectual input that needs to be provided to the government and also to the members. So I come back to the same thing that I was saying about the knowledge economy. That's getting really important. And there's going to be increasing demand for that. Soft skills really required.
Soft skills are not so soft, right? I mean,
yeah, but they're softer than the hard skills. Let me put it this way, It was good to be an engineer at one point in time, but today if you're an engineer and you can't communicate, you have a problem.
True.
You will not probably get a job. So, and if you don't know how to write in English, then you might have a problem. Or if you don't know how to write at all in any language, you will have a problem. Having said all that, I think we are at a very interesting point, given the fact that a lot of things need to change, given that the overall economy is undergoing a shift. So everybody has a role to play, whether it is individual industry, individual companies, whether it is industry bodies, whether it is sectoral bodies, whether it is the public affairs professional in a company or in an agency, because we all need to wade through and decipher a very different geography. And that is not easy, especially because everything is changing so fast. How do you keep track? How do you keep pace with the change and ensure that industry, or from a government's point of view, the government itself, it ends up losing out? to something that it ought not to be losing out.
So I want to talk about a couple of things here. One is I've seen sitting in Bangalore. So one is this FICCI and ASSOCHAM.
And CII.
And CII. And then with the rise of the information technology sector, we had the rise also of NASSCOM as a new body, right? And one of the things we saw in the last few years is that NASSCOM became a voice information services industry. And there were a minority of Indian IT companies which were product companies. And so it was wonderful to see this evolution where the product companies and the product voices came together and said, no, we want to talk about our issues separately and better. And you had the creation of iSpirit and Product Nation and other things. So it's been fascinating to see the evolution of, or at least it's not the evolution, then the hiving of and the creation of new industry bodies as industries are evolving. Is there anything I've also...
So NASSCOM actually evolved out of MATE.
Okay.
MATE still exists.
Okay.
It was Manufacturing Association of Information Technology, which still exists, but it's more focused on hardware now. So when the software part of the industry actually started growing in the early 90s, and people thought that, that's when people who were largely dealing with software services, they moved out of MATE and they set up NASSCOM. NASSCOM, then the timing was right because the IT services companies were beginning to grow. There was a demand, this was the new economic sector that was coming into play. And NASSCOM did a good job in creating the kind of visibility that it required. Whether it really made a dent to the overall economy is a question mark. But in terms of visibility, software became something really big. So companies grew, and along with, as companies grew, NASSCOM. But going back to the point again, we always reach a stage where the economy takes a turn and moves in a different direction, right? So how prepared are you to deal with those changes? So iSpirit and all those things are obviously a result of that change as it evolves. Every industry sector evolves, every economy evolves. I'm very interested in what happens with the gig economy, because if you look at people today, the current generation, which will be going out looking for jobs or is beginning to look for jobs, they are not interested in permanency. They're not interested in collecting PF. They're not even interested in buying a house. They're not interested in buying cars, right? Car sales in urban India have dropped because people in urban centers, the youngsters, are not buying cars.
Funnily enough, I bought my car 3 months before Uber came to Bangalore.
Yeah.
And Uber and Ola were there in Bangalore. And now my car belongs to my dad.
Yeah.
And I drive a scooter, or I go by...
Or you take a cab. Yeah. So, and people are happy working in shared spaces. People are happy working from Starbucks. People are happy working from under a tree. Because connectivity is not an issue any longer, right? You have, I would say, decent internet connectivity in the country, most places. And you just go and you can work. You can be a designer, you can be a blogger, you can be our friend's daughter was interested in food. She started a food blog now, which is getting several thousand hits a day. Now she is being invited by food companies to come and speak to consumers. Food companies are willing to put ads on her blog site. So, class 10th, right? And she can look at her dad, cock a snook, and say, old man, I earn more than you ever could have thought of earning when you were in school, right? So
this is like how maybe 20 years ago, the safe option was the sarkari job, but then the private sector was where the opportunity, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And today, the safe option is a private sector salaried job. And the interesting options are beyond that.
People want to do different things.
So in this age, how do we think about people saving? How do you think about insurance? How do you think about everything changes, right?
So imagine every industry is going to get hit in many, many ways. In ways people don't yet realize. And when that process begins, it has already started. When that process starts, you will see a battle out there of survival. How do I, being a monolithic organizer, imagine if suppose a large insurance company finds that one quarter its business has dropped 50% and
continues to drop 20% each quarter for the next 5 quarters. Just think what's going to happen, right? What are car companies going to do if the sales, because the only sales are happening is because people are buying cars to run an Uber or an Ola license, right? What do you do with the drivers for Ola and Uber? What are the kind of safety measures you can provide them? What is the kind of, social network you can provide them? Financial safety you can provide them. So there are all kinds of questions, many of which we don't really know yet that these will come up, right? It's like everybody's talking about the manufacturing sectors and robotics, and everybody's talking about artificial intelligence and big data and all that stuff. Very important stuff. But how do we deal with this new animal? So we are told that 25% of all sales, retail sales this Diwali was online.
Wow.
So obviously what happens to mom and pop's shops? Number one. Number two, what happens to the whole logistic chain behind, right? What happens to large electronic goods companies, which do they really need to now go and set up, showrooms? Or they can just give everything to Amazon and Flipkart, and between the two of them, they can sell it. We don't know. We don't yet know how that's going to change the whole manufacturing cycle, how that's going to change the whole logistics, business, how that's going to change. Even if you look at food and beverages and all that kind of stuff, I don't really need to. What happens to the local fishmonger, for example? We don't yet know. But guess what? I can order fresh fish online. I want to eat fish tomorrow morning. I can order fish or mutton, whatever else, at 11 o'clock at night. And guess what? At 7:30 in the morning, it's delivered fresh in my house. That job earlier used to be done by the local fishmonger you could call. Now you could call because thanks to mobile phones. But earlier you could go and tell him the night before, tomorrow morning, can you send me some fish? And he will send you fish when the fresh fish came. So when the nature of the economy is changing, the policies around the economy also need to change.
And in all this, policy has to change, but there is always politics about it. And this is not electoral politics,
no.
Right? This is what does an incumbent do when they have power that is going away.
Absolutely.
One part they'll adapt, the other they can react. And we see protectionism all over the world, right? This is not a...
The critical thing is that we don't need to react. We always have to respond. But to respond, we need to be aware.
So Rahul, we've largely talked about this from a domestic point of view, but industry bodies and lobbying and all of this will have a significant international role to play, right? Especially now that we have new trade wars erupting, the visa issue is always a concern for Indian software companies and the US visas, right? So there is a large global dimension to this as well.
Yes, there is. But a lot of work gets done government to government. And industry bodies usually come in a support role. They, of course, raise the issues. But the negotiations and discussions are essentially done between governments. And while industry bodies and interested parties can provide the background knowledge for better understanding, provide the options, what is good, what is bad, what is ugly, where it should go, what is of interest, what is not of interest. Essentially, the discussions are government to government. So, as far as visas are concerned, yes, big issue with H-1B visas. But then the US government has taken a call, under the current administration that this is where they need to go. So that's where they will go. At the same time, what you got to ensure is that the Indian interest does not get impacted badly. So there are discussions, and there will be discussions.
But this is where, there's the US Chamber of Commerce, but there's also the US India Business Council. And I heard that many Indian industry bodies also have representatives, either part-time or full-time in Washington, D.C.
As in all negotiations, it's always give and take, right? You're not going to get everything. So you got to be clear in your mind, what is it that you can live with? And you know that things will eventually change, right? 2 years down the road, this administration may not be in place. Who knows, right? And you might have another opportunity to go back to where you are. Or even if this administration continues, it might be thinking differently about what it does today. So you got to take all these things into account and then find a middle ground. Eventually, it's always a middle ground. Everybody cannot have whatever they want. So
in all policy making, in all negotiations, discussions, the government will always try to its agenda. If it tries very hard, chances are it will get through. But then if it's going to impact the government negatively, then the governments will not do it. Okay. So on every issue, there are discussions and negotiations that take place. And eventually either something is found out, or if nothing is found out, then it keeps hanging and waits for the right day and the right time to come along.
So Rahul, on this, I want to really ask, so now that this is a space where there are new opportunities, where this is an opportunity for knowledge, research, thought, communication, everything is sort of different. What kind of jobs do you see opening up? Who do you think, like we at Takshashila, run policy courses to train how many people you teach, strategic media engagement and more. What kind of jobs are you seeing open up at what levels?
So I think mid-level jobs where we'll start. I think we are still in the process of seeing many companies actually set up systems internally where these kind of things can be put into play. A lot of large MNCs have that because they are bringing in the experience from other markets.
Right. So they'll have a public policy team in the US. So when they open up India.
They open up India, they will have a team that sort of connects with that team. If you're a global organization, you need to have a very good view of what's happening around in the world. It's not just one market and two markets. Anything happening in market A might impact market B. So you will have that. As far as Indian companies are concerned, still very traditional. But I think slowly making that change over as they understand. But I think it also depends on what level do you engage with the government. Most large Indian companies, the head of the companies have direct access to the government. Therefore, it may not always be necessary that they might require the kind of back-end research, knowledge and support that they want, because then it's direct conversation.
But as you even mentioned earlier, even when you have that direct connection, you need a follow-through and support system, which sometimes companies will lack, right? Because the CEO will have to do a lot of things.
So you need that support system. So in that sense, yes. So you will have people. I possibly see people who have a grounding in policy making, understanding of what policy is, the environment, and policy formulation and drafting, for example. So people with legal background, for example, because lawyers are generally good at drafting. That's one of the things that they have to learn early. So that's the kind of background. But that doesn't stop others with others' background, because people can have very specific sectoral backgrounds and knowledge that can be put to good use in areas where there are companies that are interested in that kind of work.
Rahul, thank you so much for coming on the Pragati Podcast. We hope to have you back on the show before too long.
Thanks a lot, Pavan, for having me, and look forward to hearing my voice. Speak to me. Okay.
Thank you for staying with us till the end. Please share this episode with others and please help spread the word about podcasts in India. If you listen to the Pragati Podcast on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, please leave us a rating and a review. It will mean a lot to us. Visit thinkpragati.com for your daily dose of brain fodder. Subscribe to the Pragati Podcast on the IVM Podcast app or wherever you get your podcasts from. We are there everywhere.
Hi, my name is Anupam Gupta. I'm B50 on Twitter. I am the host of Paisa Vaisa, the show that talks money. On my show, I speak to experts from every field of money and finance, from stock markets, equities, debt funds, credit cards, life insurance, every possible area of money and finance that you can think of. We even did an episode on cryptocurrency. I've got fantastic guests from mutual funds to personal finance experts everywhere. Robo-advisory, startups, just name it, we've got it. At Paisa Vaisa, we help you make smart decisions about money. You work hard for money. Now make your money work hard for you. New episodes out every Monday, and you can listen to my show on the IVM Podcast app or any other podcasting app that you have.
Do you wish you were smarter? Well, so do we. But the next best thing?
We could make you sound smarter.
And to help you with this endeavor, we are Simplified, a podcast that attempts to break down the complex world around you with a little knowledge, a lot of poor jokes, and a ton of random trivia.
Episodes out every Monday
On the IVM Podcast app or wherever you get your podcasts.
See ya!